Wow, there is so much to cover today. I hardly knew which video to start with, which subject to tackle first. And before I get started, no, there's nothing in Congress about wearing a Christmas sweater and guillotine earrings. I want to start with this breaking news from the Supreme Court. I don't often cover breaking news. I usually give it a couple of days to see what shakes out, what develops from the story. But time and time again throughout the last several years, and especially in 2025, we have watched lower courts hold the line for democracy, uphold the rule of law, only to see the uber conservative six with their fringe unitary executive theory come in and smack down lower court rulings, and often using the shadow docket to advance Donald Trump's authoritarian agenda, to give extreme amounts of power to the executive, to basically install Donald Trump as a king in the United States of America. So when the Supreme Court doesn't rule with Donny Boy, we got to talk about it. We got to talk about it. So earlier today, SCOTUS came back against Donald Trump in this case in Illinois. According to NPR, for right now, SCOTUS is refusing to reinstate Trump's ability to send the National Guard into Illinois over objections of its governor. Right, so the bullshit argument that Donald Trump's Department of Homeland Security was using was that they had to put the National Guard in Illinois because there was unremitting violence against ICE agents at detention facilities in the Chicago area. You know, where ICE was shooting rubber bullets into the heads of pastors who were praying, were shoving pastors to the ground, pepper spraying members of the clergy in the face. Those interactions between non-violent protesters who are exercising their constitutional rights and the completely out of control ICE chuddies, untrained, unqualified, completely ill-equipped to handle those interactions that are very tense, right? ICE has no interest in de-escalating, no interest in bringing the temperature down, no interest in defending anybody's rights. Their entire purpose is to instigate violence and to trample the rights of American citizens and immigrants alike. But the claim from Donald Trump's Department of Homeland Security was we have to bring in the National Guard because it's really unsafe for ICE. It's really awful for ICE there. And of course, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker was like, fuck off. We don't need the National Guard here. In every city, every state, every jurisdiction where Donald Trump has attempted to mobilize the National Guard against American citizens, to use our military against American citizens. The pretext has been ever shifting, right? In DC, it was all about protecting people from street youth, from thugs, meaning Black teenagers, basically, and then also like needing to clean up homeless camps. Here in Portland, the bullshit claim was, oh, we have to defend this country against Antifa and these radical terrorists at the tiny little ICE detention facility on Macadam Avenue. There never were domestic terrorists here in Portland, and we did and continue to do a fantastic job of completely disproving Donald Trump's ridiculous narrative with all of the tactical frivolity. Jack in a chicken suit, folks in frog costumes, folks in tutus, fairy wings, bubbles, tea parties, all of this tactical frivolity to show like, hey, we're not violent. We're like really innocuous. We're just normal people. A little bit weird. Portlanders are a little weird. We're a little bit weird, but we are here exercising our constitutional rights. It's wild. It's beyond wild. It's nonsensical. It's completely deranged to think that you need to bring in armed members of the military and use them against kids in inflatable costumes, elderly veterans with walkers, middle-aged women doing a knit-in. Donald Trump's desire to use the military against the American people looks extreme and outsized and oppressive because it is all of those things. So getting back to today's SCOTUS ruling in Illinois, the court said, using again their emergency docket, at this preliminary stage, the government has failed to identify a source of authority that would allow the military to execute the laws in Illinois. The majority wrote this in a very, very short opinion. They went on to say that the president failed to explain why the situation in Illinois warranted an exception to the Posse Comitatus Act that limits the military's ability to execute laws on U.S. soil. This is the first time the court has come in and given a definitive opinion here. Now, according to NPR, the way that this ruling is worded, I don't know enough. I should ask my pre-law kid. I don't know enough about SCOTUS rulings to understand when a precedent is set and when one is not. According to this, this particular decision does not set a precedent, but it is a preliminary rejection of the Trump regime's arguments about how they should be allowed to use the military. Now, I personally think there'll be a crash out from Trump in response to this, because at the core of his authoritarian agenda, right, his plan pivots on us backing down because we are afraid of the military. His entire agenda pivots around being able to use the military, for him to behave as a military dictator, to intimidate the American people and to get us to lie down. Every time we have pushed back in every city and every state, he's had a crash out. He thinks he controls the Supreme Court. After all, the Roberts Court has deferred to him, has shown tremendous deference for Donald Trump for years. So to see them stand up in opposition to him, to rule against him and his whims, and again, the core of his authoritarian agenda, I do anticipate that there will be a mentee B, there will be a crash out from Donald Trump very, very soon, especially in light of all of the new Epstein stuff that came out today, which I'll get to in a video in a little bit. Earlier today, Illinois' AG Kwame Raoul said this: the extremely limited circumstances under which the federal government can call up the militia over a state's objection do not exist in Illinois, and I am pleased that the streets of Illinois remain free of armed National Guard members as our litigation continues in the courts. Of course, the White House did not respond when NPR asked them to comment. I do think it's interesting that Brett Kavanaugh wrote his own separate concurring opinion agreeing with the majority. But it should not surprise us that the two justices dissenting in this case were Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas. Now, I know a lot of us like to think that the Supreme Court rules basically just on legal precedent and the Constitution, but we know, even though they are supposed to be an apolitical entity, they have a political agenda. The majority, the uber fringe conservative six in the majority, absolutely have a political agenda. And we could argue that the Roberts Court has done more to undermine democracy than any other entity in the United States, in the history of the United States. And I made a video a couple of days ago talking about how there is a growing movement for there to be Supreme Court reform, and how we, the American people, have to push that. We have to push our elected officials to push for court reform, either expanding the court, which would be relatively pretty uncomplicated, actually, requiring a majority vote of the Senate, or something greater like a constitutional amendment to set term limits for SCOTUS. There could be other reforms. We the people actually can decide what the Supreme Court looks like. We can actually get reforms. It just takes that groundswell of organized, I don't want to say resistance, organized reform that the people can use to push our elected officials. And in that video, I said that I agreed with Ezra Levin from Indivisible that if there is a public demand for court reform, we are going to see changes in the way that Roberts Court rules, because John Roberts then will feel that there is actually a real threat to his tremendous amount of power and control. If there is court reform, if they expand the number of justices on the Supreme Court, we have a Democratic president, Roberts will not have his little iron fist grip on power where he is advancing his fringe unitary executive theory. It is difficult to reach the court, but it's not impossible. And after I made that video, I saw that Jamel Bouie of the New York Times is also calling for Supreme Court reform. I saw Attorney George Conway also calling for Supreme Court reform. This topic needs to be elevated in the popular discourse, the popular consciousness. We need to set an expectation of like, oh yeah, of course we're going to reform the Supreme Court. Look at the shit they've gotten up to this year. Look at how they have failed to uphold the law over and over. The Supreme Court is the problem. The lower courts, not a problem. Overwhelmingly upholding the rule of law. It's just the fringe radical 6 justices on the far right, and they are radical activist judges. Make no mistake about that. And so I do wonder a little bit whether or not this ruling was on some level informed, motivated by the growing calls for Supreme Court reform. What do you think? Regardless, this is a good move for democracy. This is absolutely what the American people need right now, because it is the preservation of the rule of law. It is honoring the rule of law and respecting the rights of us, the American people. Again, Donald Trump's going to have a meltdown over it, I'm sure, and we will see how this all unfolds. This is a huge, huge win for all of us today, and we should celebrate that fact.